Before I start my actual keynote, I would like to invite you into a very vulnerable space and read you a love letter. I leave it for you to decide if this is to someone in my life, or maybe it is to you. Sitting here at the very front because you want to hear every word, or at the corner because you're feeling shy, or all the way at the back because life got in the way and you ran late. Either way, I'm so grateful to you for giving me your time, the most precious of all resources, to hear me speak about the future not just as it has been, but as it could be. Thank you for gifting me your attention to entertain my future dreams, like maybe at least some of them could be yours too. But this brief moment, amidst all of the alienation, maybe we can breathe together, feel together. So many people think of me as this optimistic, inspirational, almost superhuman kind of character. I'm a fighter, yes, and a survivor, true, but just as human as you. And if I'm honest, the very reason I ended up working on the kind of futurism that inspires hope is because throughout my life, I have experienced periods where my mind would cloud and I descend into an abyss of my own futurelessness, you could say. To imagine that things could be different than what they are has never been a fanciful intellectual exercise for me, but a survival strategy. There were stretches where this is what has literally kept me alive. If I can feel that my words give you hope, it helps me to not succumb to despair as well. And the hopes you share with me, your future dreams, replenish mine too. Besides that, a resignation to just live in the world as it is has never seemed a viable option for me, because the world as it is not a very welcoming place for people like us, nor accepting of life like ours. The truth is that it's through shared grief that we get to know each other in the deepest, most visceral, most lasting of ways. All of what I have to say about the future has been filtered through this lens of complex, often traumatic experience. Not just my experience, our shared pain too. Not just our shared pleasure. And yet, we can't keep picking at these wounds and think they would heal. So how do we move beyond it when it seems like everything is trying to pin us down to our past? So much of seemingly senseless suffering, you throw your hands in the air and tell me you can't see a way out. But you know as well as I do that rarely, if ever, anything happens in vain unless we give in to it. We can stay in what seems like an unbearable limbo, or we can transform all this pain to change. We keep being told that it'd be better for us to choose an easier path, an escape route, a belief that none of this is in our hands anymore. But you know we're being lied to, so let's not start lying to ourselves as well. You know that within us we have so much of what it takes. Even if every day you are facing what seems impossible, it only becomes truly impossible if we let our other people's projections stamp out our determination to prove otherwise. I'm cursed, but also blessed to have this outlet of my practice, the gift of being able to pour into it whatever life brings me, transmuting even some of the most disheartening moments into something meaningful, something that hopefully ends up changing lives, or at the very least, positively affecting many life trajectories. Every day, I give thanks for this privilege to speak my own voice and have it resonate with so many. But all I can dream of right now is that you, yes, you, would see that the status quo is not all that there is, let alone not all that can be. If I can inspire thousands of strangers, can I hope at last to inspire you too? How come it seems easier to reach the hearts of strangers than those who tell us they love us? You say you hear me, but do you? And do you even hear yourself amidst all the noise? How loud must I scream, or how sweetly and patiently must I learn to whisper? Sometimes it feels like you just won't trust that my words are for you, or that I actually believe what I say. But they are, and I do. I believe in you, and I believe in us, and I believe in what we are capable of together. From pain to change, I still believe we can do this. Or maybe I just don't have a choice. Over 10 years ago, I died, yet clung to life, and promised myself I will never take any of it for granted. I know you know this is neither a game nor a dress rehearsal. For our very chance of staying alive, we cannot give into a predetermined future. If we stay where we are, how we are, this just might kill us. Can we finally see how we need each other as a team to work towards possibility of a different reality urgently. So I ask, can you close your eyes and begin to imagine? Imagine what it would really be like us being us and deserving this exuberant joy and happiness, not despite it, but for it. Imagine actually getting to not just savor it furtively, as if in fear for being caught, judged, and punished, but actually live it. Imagine a possibility of healing so we can be the fullest versions of ourselves, actually belong, not just be forced to fit into the world that was never conceived for us in the first place. The extraordinary courage that it takes today to dream of the possibility of a livable, let alone happy future. To share these dreams not just clandestinely with each other, but out and loud with the entire world. My biggest dream is to make hope irresistible. Stickier, stronger, more resilient, more infectious than fear. I believe in us making this future that is ours truly, celebrating love against all odds. Remember what we spoke about radical tenderness? This is it. This is what it is about. To allow ourselves to deeply care, even knowing that it might take so much longer and so much more than what we have, and that there will inevitably be pain or even loss sooner or later along the way. Radical tenderness is not about fighting or dying for a cause. I repeat, radical tenderness is not about fighting or dying for a cause or even each other. It is not about torching the world down. Radical tenderness is in fact all about finding hope, no matter what, no matter how, to resist the impulse of torching it all down and to resist running away from it all too. Radical tenderness is about deliberately choosing growth, compassion, care, and understanding, rather than temporary, deceptive conveniences of despair and rage. We are people that do not have the luxury of time to shove things under the rug and delude ourselves it will just magically resolve itself. Now onwards, even as we feel fear, we will not allow ourselves to be consumed by it. We will continue loving our intertwined existence on this wondrous, heartbroken planet as deeply and authentically as mortal beings can with the limited time that we have. Everything else is just strategy and details. Remember, I'm a futurist. I know if we actually try, we can figure things out. To say no is never enough. We need shared yes visions. Then with patience and determination, we can bend the very fabric of reality towards it. I know others might dismiss this as wishful thinking, but at least we would know. We have not abdicated. We did all we could. At the very least, we would know we have actually tried. So today, I want to speak about Protopia as an antidote to futures of fear, because it is fear and alienation and isolation that is screaming at us from every corner. Geopolitically, from the media narratives, in the realm of technology too. We have to resist it. We've been suffering from a bit of a crisis of imagination. There are two most popular ways to think about the future: dystopia and utopia. And they've been positioned as opposites to each other. But really, are they? So first, let's start with dystopia. Dystopia is visions of future, of doom and gloom, where everything's lost. But what does it actually do? Is it really anymore a cautionary tale that makes us act otherwise? Or actually, it resigns us to desperate escapism. If everything is lost and there's nothing we can do about it, that maybe we just do nothing? But something even worse happens with this continuous regurgitation of dystopia and some of the world's most talented people, writers, filmmakers, directors, concept artists, using their talent, energy, time to give some great ideas to some of the world's most horrible people. Because there will always be those that will see that there's money to be made as the world burns, or even by setting the world on fire. So we need an alternative. And so utopia gets positioned as such. But is it really an alternative? To understand that, I think we need to backtrack into the history of utopianism. And when we do that, we realize that it's always been exclusionary and eugenic by default. What do I mean by eugenic? Eugenics is this ideology absolutely tied with homophobia, ableism, white supremacy, and colonialism, of breeding this future version of superhumans. And indeed, Superman, a Marvel superhero, history is tied to that too. Utopias have always been profoundly homogenous. Anybody that didn't fit the narrow idea of a homogeneous civilization that represented that top-down perfection tended to somehow disappear. How? By process of elimination? Actually, yes. If we look at historical utopias from the colonization of Americas that required the largest human enslavement in our history, as well as the largest indigenous genocide, to the Nazi expansion of their Lebensraum, that had some very interesting environmental ideas, yet only required extermination of disabled people, neurodivergent people, queer people, Jewish people, Roma people, and a whole lot of other ethnic minorities. And I know that history doesn't get told as much in this country, but as Lungi mentioned, I was born in a place that doesn't exist anymore, Soviet Union. And Soviet Union has committed crimes just as comparable with all of the other colonial horrors. Ethnic cleansing, indigenous genocide. Disabled people were not seen as of any value because they were not productive. And of course, some of the most horrendous environmental crimes as well. So, do any of these frameworks represent a real answer? Or if we just scratch just a little bit beyond the surface of any historical utopia and a lot of today's techno-utopian propositions, what we find is that it was built on somebody else's dystopia, on somebody else's flesh, blood, and bones. There's this narrative that it's the tech gazillionaires of the world, the Jeff Bezos and Elon Musks that are deciding the future for us. But if we look into their biographies and analyze their interviews, what we find out that so many of them, as little boys, teenagers, or young adults, watched a particular movie or a TV series that ended up ossifying their imagination what future could be at that stage. Now, what's interesting is that actually a lot of those narratives were predicated on mid-20th century cultural, but also even scientific understandings that then became science fiction books about a couple of decades later, that then became these iconic science fiction movies and TV series, that then becomes this imagination that all of the rest of us is forcefully stuck in because that's the only way that they can think about the future. So it's really those that control the fantasy that control the future. Do we want to live in somebody else's fantasy? Or do we want to create our own future imagination? Because if we don't, we're not just stuck with the legacy of these historical utopias. We now start living in this age of techno-utopianism that is profoundly eschatological as well. So TESCRAIL is this term, strange, I know it sounds, that was coined by Timnit Gebru and Emil P. Torres. And it represents this bundle of ideologies: transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. Very fanciful terms, and some of them actually sound quite nice. Transhumanism, you could think, well, maybe that's about inclusion of trans people's rights. But it is everything but. Transhumanism actually is profoundly ableist and oftentimes also transphobic. Singularitarianism is this idea that humans and human intelligence is becoming most definitely obsolete, and that we're going to reach this magical moment of AI explosion that will render us just like what we think of primate animals today. Effective altruism, you think it's altruistic, or long-termism, you think it would be about long-term thinking. But again, these ideologies are simply these sci-fi narratives that actually are not too unlike of any of the previous eschatological theologies. Just right now, it's not about religious dogma, but about a nerd fantasy of rapture. What we have to remember is that accelerationists, those that think that we need to burn it all down so that something new in their own image arises from it, see all of us as expendable. Because we know when things burn down, the ones that suffer the most are the ones already the most marginalized. In fact, it is really tied with ascensionism. And actually, transhumanism as a term was first used in Dante's Inferno, about this imagination, how after the rapture, humans will arise in that transformed form. But again, it's so deeply tied with colonial legacy because it denies us the connection to everything that sustains us. Our bodies, the soil, our indigenous traditions. It deems all of that as primitive, dirty, filthy, that needs to be transcended. In favor of what? Engineered parts and zeros and ones? Do we really want to live in that fantasy? The truth is that tech solutionism that doesn't address foundational issues always equals oppressive, destructive future that benefits only those sitting up there in the ivory tower. I hope you're a little bit on the edge of your seat and asking yourself, so what do we do? Well, we can start by pushing back both on nostalgia and techno-fetishism. Nostalgia can be poison. When we start thinking that there's this fictional past that we want to make great again and not reckon with the lessons of the past that need to be learned. And when we think that technology can be this magical panacea decontextualized from who we are and who we have been as humans. To be truly visionary, we have to root our imagination, our concrete reality, while simultaneously imagining possibilities beyond that reality. Bell hooks. What it's really about is that we can't just look forward. We need to understand what is this present moment that we live in, what is really at stake, and how did we get here? It's only if we understand these patterns that we can attempt to break them. I'm a futurist, and people ask me, oh, so you predict trends? And I say, well, actually, I try to do much beyond that. Not just passively extrapolate from a data of status quo, but try to think, how do we go beyond that? How do we break these patterns that have harmed majority of us? I say informed hope is so much better than techno-billionaire optimism and their wishful thinking and their propositions, how we're just going to leapfrog these problems, how AI is going to come in and now make the society equal. Well, they're not really interested in justice or equality. How VR, you're just going to put on the goggles and it's going to make you empathetic. It's going to make you understand what it is like to be a refugee. It only gives you an audacity of an illusion to think that you understand what it is to be a refugee. As I said, technology is not some kind of magical panacea. It's merely an extension of our minds and of our bodies, from slingshots to satellites, from eyeglasses to AR glasses. It is our values, priorities, biases that feed into how we design these technological tools. If the problem is social, cultural, political, the solution also needs to be social, cultural, and political. But yes, the tools can accompany us in that journey. And so, I say that the only way to actually start moving towards livable, aka what I labeled as protopian future, is through evolved values, supported by innovative tools. But it's always us, humans, humanity, that are setting the direction, rather than the imaginary, fictional agency of technology itself. So, Protopia Futures Collective has been founded all the way back in 2020, but I've been working on it for about 10 years. Really because of my not just dissatisfaction, but a real anger and frustration with how this regurgitation of entertainment industry's dystopianism actually ends up feeding the techno-utopianism of Silicon Valley. How all of these dystopian visions, such as, let's say, Minority Report, then end up being on the VC pitch decks, leading to companies such as Palantir, deeply racialized predictive surveillance tech. So, when we started structuring these principles, what was really important for us is to not think of them as this hierarchical Maslow's pyramid of needs, but as truly interconnected circles. So when I talk about them, think about them in that way. There's a certain overlap, and all of them need to be worked on together. And they're also not finite. Please reach out with your suggestions. This is all meant to be expanded. Protopia, unlike dystopia and utopia, is not really a noun. And in fact, it is not singular, it is protopias. It's about a verb, it's about proactive prototyping, it's about doing that, it's about process. It's about continuous learning, not about being right. Okay, so the first one, plurality, beyond binaries. It's fully acknowledging that there is no default and the diverse. That we've always existed, not in singularity, but in plurality. And that where we're going, and with the kind of global problems we're facing, just tolerance is not enough. We need to truly, truly become curious, to embrace our diversity in our ethnic backgrounds, in our cultures, in our social upbringings, in our disciplinary backgrounds, in our disabilities, in our neurodivergence, in our generational perspectives, and come together not because we're the same, but because we have this complementary viewpoints that will be required to, at the very least, start addressing the challenges that we face. Next one, tied with it, interdependence. So interdependence is something that is such a duh in indigenous understandings of the world and in disability justice framework. As diverse and as indigenous people have been across all of the continents, there's something that is in common, and that is understanding that we are all tied together, that we affect each other as humans, but also as all life forms, because of simply how we co-evolved evolutionary. And same thing with disability justice. It is so obvious that independence is illusion. We are born needing others, and unless we die a sudden death, we will experience disability or neurodivergence at some point where we'll need other people's support. So instead of waiting when that happens and then be shocked how adverse that reality is, maybe instead of thinking of independence as aspirational, we can start thinking how it's actually this interdependence that allows us to be stronger. Us being there for each other rather than us not needing each other. Next point, something that really, really gets overlooked in most of a sci-fi, and that's celebration of embodiment, pleasure, joy. Not in that superficial sense, not the joy of buying or consuming, but the joy of embodiment, of being in this body, even if it hurts, even if it's not the strongest, the fastest, and can jump the highest. It's not about that. It's about that sensory experience of the world. It's about being able to touch each other. It's about being able to walk on that grass. It's about being able to smell each other. Or maybe to not being able to do most of these things, but having a heightened sense in something else. It's about that connection, not just to other fellow humans, but to our own body, to our own skin, to our own being here, alive, in this flesh. And also, our connection to all of this amazing, extraordinary life that we can smell, touch, experience, be together with. And that, of course, leads to biosphere regeneration. We know that sustainability is by no means enough. So much damage has been done. We need to repair. We need to not just build and engineer more, but also grow and nourish. And maybe in that, we need to recognize that we're not the smartest out here. Because we as humans are still stuck in this linear production model where we look at the living world as resources and just think that we have this right, the God-given right, to pillage, to take it all and turn into products and turn into waste and just discard. When we look at life itself and we start seeing it as the most perfect technology, when we start acknowledging how much wealth there is in how nature does things, how growth is not about this infinite consumption on a finite world, but about regeneration, about the process of becoming. Maybe we'll start learning how we can design, build, and live in a greater communion with it all. And then the next points really tied in together: creative flourishment and spiritual fulfillment. We know that when fascism regimes, or communist regimes, that are not that different after all, come to power, one of the first things that they try to do is to clench down on any creative and spiritual expressions that threaten them. In the Soviet Union, not just forms of conventional religion, Christianity, be it Orthodox or Catholic, that was attempted to be destroyed, but it's also all of the indigenous traditions within the largest country in the world, 2/2 of which actually exist amidst the indigenous lands of Eurasia. Same thing again with Nazi Germany. The first biggest threat was actually queer culture. So we know that narrowing of cultural and spiritual expressions is what allows fascism to expand. And we know that it's a lie, that it's only those that have already everything, food and water and shelter and luxuries, that are the best creatives. Nothing could be further from the truth. We know that some of the most amazing creativity arises from hardship. And similarly, what I spoke about earlier, how religious dogma, whether as we have known historically, or these new forms of technological religions are used to create in-groups and out-groups and to justify atrocity. So what is the spirituality of the future that doesn't succumb to New Age juju and conspirituality, but actually allows us, again, to be more connected with our own bodies, with our own physical presence, with our own minds, with each other, and with the rest of the world? Which leads me to the last point, and it's really about evolved values. Unless we reimagine what are these values of the future world that we want to inhabit that could lead to it being livable, we won't be able to change anything. We need to really profoundly reconsider, what do we think of as power? Is it power to abuse, to possess, to control? Or does power mean duty and responsibility? And what is beauty and what is ugliness in such future? So much that is in between these beautiful goals that I hope some of you subscribe to and some of you would give me critique to, is how technological systems and technological tools that we're using today continue perpetuating this stereotyping and these exclusions. So what and who is the dystopian and utopian default? What if the system keeps telling you that you do not exist? Yesterday, we did a presentation with the Collective of African Life-Centric Design with the co-founders Pumla and Amu. And when we're trying to put together the presentation, and of course, for already many months and actually years before, what you realize that within these AI systems, all of a sudden when you put any keyword that is not centering the past fictional default, all of a sudden, whatever other keyword you put about the future ends up being denied. Whenever you try to imagine any futures within African context, or actually pretty much across Global South, at the very best, you get these fetishized, cliched, stereotyped ideas. So we need to change that together. And we will only change that if we'll actually push for that grassroots resistance, if we actually also integrate the current structures of power that be, and if we also create alternatives. It will take all of that. Because currently, generative AI tools are mostly used to simulate and distort our past and future. You know, everybody's talking about these promises of it, but currently, it's helping us in some cases and facilitating some of our work. And yes, it's important to learn how to use these tools and how to collaborate them. But also, we have to question them. One thing that generative AI is going to be excellent at is expanding the frontiers of hybrid warfare. For those not familiar with the term, hybrid warfare is this intricate strategic combination of cyber warfare, disinformation warfare, kinetic warfare, and economic warfare. That is happening for sure. And people are losing jobs from this for sure. But it's not like these tools will just disappear or we're going to be able to ban them. So what we need is to challenge how they are designed, how they're being deployed, and who gets to use and abuse them, and create alternatives. Because instead, generative AI could actually be used to foster more expansive future possibilities. Instead of just creating these simulations and distortions of our past, you know, AI presenting us what it was like being in a civil rights era, it doesn't understand any of it. A friend of mine wrote this article about generative AI smile and how it was putting these fake smiles on different populations of the Global South in a historical context of colonization. We don't want that. What we want is to use that to help us to imagine how things could be different. And as I said, it is vital that we do not succumb to this discourse coming from Silicon Valley that sees us and our intelligence as expendable. Because the truth is that AI without humans in a loop equals degenerative AI. When it just starts feeding on itself and becomes completely removed from not just lived reality of ours, but of human lived reality at large. Whenever anybody propositions to us this idea of magical technological panacea, we have to question how all of this human optimization is maybe trying to optimize away our humanity. Are we really trying to solve a problem, or are we trying to solve ourselves out of the equation? So in all of that, the keyword really is never design for, always design with. And it's always the leadership of the most impacted that benefits all of us. Whenever any decisions are being made, whether within scientific research or technological development or policy making, what needs to be identified is who really is at that bleeding edge of harm, who gets to be affected firstly and most directly, and how not only they should be asked the questions of how to avoid that harm, but actually be in the positions of leadership in understanding how we create something that actually safeguards from harm. And it's not some kind of charity work. The truth is that if we cared more about indigenous communities in the global south that live with the tightest connection to land, then even people in the global north would end up being less affected by the impacts of climate change and climate pattern disruption. If in the pandemic policy we didn't embrace these eugenic ideas where we said, well, too bad, if you have cancer, you might just die. I'm young and strong, I will not. And that, what happens is that a lot of these young and strong and healthy and so fit people end up with newly acquired disabilities that now puts them in this immunocompromised category, right? So actually centering the leadership of the most impacted makes it better for most of us. Well, maybe not for the few of them, but maybe that's not the main issue. And another huge issue, right, is this anthropomorphization of AI and aliens, yet mechanomorphizing of life. Very fancy words. So anthropomorphizing is essentially projecting humanity onto. And mechanomorphizing, it's seeing things as machines and dehumanizing. So much of science fiction narratives are about this excitement of encountering alien intelligence. And even AIs are now being called alien intelligences on Earth. But the truth is that we already have alien intelligences. We still have very little understanding of how the mind of the octopi work. We are just discovering, maybe not languages, but communication systems of non-human animals. We are discovering so much, and yet we keep denying consciousness to everything that surrounds us and project consciousness into these fictional ideas that we are not likely to encounter in the realities of our lives. This is from a book, Immense World by Ed Yong. With every language, with every creature that vanishes, we lose a way of making sense of the world. It's not just about loss of sequences of words. It's not just about the loss of particular DNA. Every language is a whole understanding, a whole alternative understanding of the world and what it is to be alive in it. The loss of every species, every creature, is a loss of a whole different to human sensory experience of this planet. it's not enough to just record these languages and hope that one day AI will recreate them. It's not enough to just capture the DNA of species that are getting extinct at an exponential rate. Recently, I've been having conversations with a brilliant African-American neuroscientist, Eric Jarvis, about a genome sequencing project that they're doing. And he actually specializes in the neuroscience of vocalization. And one of the things that we know is that right now there's this proposition to bring back some extinct species. But what happens even to humans that have this really broad capacity of vocalization if in the first months and years of our life we're not within a rich vocal sensory environment? Well, in fact, humans fail to develop language capacity. Our culture has evolved over millions, hundreds of thousands, and thousands of years. And so it has for all other species. We know that different chimp communities have different cultures. So if we just bring back certain individuals from certain species, but they have no context of the world that they have evolutionarily co-evolved with, they will not survive in it, nor we will. There's this famous quote by Buckminster Fuller, who's one of the most famous 20th century futurists, that still gets quoted by so many of my colleagues as something really positive. And it positions that we are all crew on the spaceship Earth. Sounds kind of cool, right? But is it really? Is Earth really a spaceship? Can it be engineered to its component parts? And are we really on it in this controlling position? Even if we've been causing so much damage, we're not on it, and Earth is not a spaceship. We are off this planet, not on this planet. Earth is a complex living ecosystem, and all that we are is inextricably linked with it. We can't just destroy it and destroy our connection and relationship with it and think that somehow, magically, we will be fine. We truly live in an immense world, but here on Earth, we have so much to learn. Not just about the communication systems of other species, but also about the minds of neurodivergent people and disabled people. Transhumanists love to fetishize this idea of how cool it would be if we would have tools for humans to be able to echolocate, essentially perceive and visualize world as bats and whales do. Guess what? There are already people that can echolocate here on Earth. Does anybody know? Exactly. Some blind people have learned the skills of echolocation, making click sounds. Interesting, right? That it's so connected to the languages that originated in the southern part of Africa. And visualize the world through clicks. And yet, not only that, they're learning and teaching each other. From blind to blind person, from disabled to disabled person, has not been supported. It has been actively denied. Because how will that make able-bodied people feel? All of a sudden, I'll feel kind of stupid and kind of incapable. There is so much to learn. I'm somebody with a pretty serious form of ADHD and autism. And people say, oh, but you seem so normal. Oh, I don't see your autism. Kind of similar. Oh, I don't see your color. I don't want you to deny my neurodivergence. I want you to acknowledge that by being curious of it, there's so much that you could also learn. That your way of doing or seeing or thinking is not the only right way that there is. So we have to remember that we live in an immense world, but already here on Earth. And we truly are in this together. But we're not in the same boat. Some have yachts, others barely have life jackets. Some, and not just humans, are actively drowning. Privilege is not so much anymore about our gender, ability, disability, or skin tone, even if that correlates a lot. Fundamentally, privilege is about the ability of being insulated from the consequences of your actions. Is your ability to even entertain this illusion that these consequences of your actions or your inaction will somehow not affect you. So much division, so much fear. So many of these binaries, utopia, dystopia, left, right, conservative, progressive, they have legacy affiliations that make us feel stuck to something that maybe is not really helpful anymore. So what is maybe a more helpful emergent political binary? How maybe we could start seeing our commonalities. And I think that is offered by a new rethinking of politics and geopolitics and culture and social structuring. Is extractive versus regenerative. A friend of mine, Donnie McClurkin, has done this experiment around the world, across different cultures, social groups, disciplinary backgrounds, etc., etc. And he asks people, what is the world you would actually like to live in? Can you please draw a very simple shape? And what he found is that across all of these backgrounds, not everybody, but most people, end up drawing a very limited amount of shapes that represent the world they would like to live in. And that is a circle, a heart, infinity sign, or spiral, or the variation of that. And when he asked them, and what is the world that we actually live in? They end up drawing pyramid, square, rectangular, a bunch of scratch lines, or one singular line. So there's a lot in common when we ask ourselves, what is the future we would actually like to live in? Do we really believe that more extraction will lead anywhere good? And that this deus ex machina of space colonization or something like that will offer any real answers? So we have a choice. Some fanciful words again, I'm sorry. Iremocene or symbiocene. I'm sure some of you have heard the term Anthropocene, right? It's this age that we currently live in, where we've created so much impact to the planet that it can be actually, that would be actually seen in the future in even the fossil layer. We created so much waste, so much damage, so much species extinction that it will remain visible in the millions of years to come unless we just fully blow up this planet. And so Iremocene is actually what comes after, is this existential loneliness and sickness, even physical sickness, that we already are experiencing. So much of anxiety, stress, autoimmune conditions, inflammatory conditions, cancers are tied to the fact that we fail to acknowledge that only 30 trillion of cells within our body is ours, and about 40 trillion is the microbiome. About 90% of DNA within our bodies is not ours. 10% body mass, but we are not islands, we are ecosystems. And every time we shake each other's hands, or kiss each other, or go for a swim in a lake, or eat different food, we establish that interconnection. We can only be well if we're not alone. So, my proposition is symbiocene, is this age that could come against all odds if we work towards it together, of us finally learning to understand and acknowledge the interdependence that we are bound with. And in that, we have to defy these narratives of rapture, aka escapism. Move tenderly, stop breaking things, people, planet. from user-centric, human-centric, humanity-centered, to actually life-centric design. We're not just users, and we are not just alone on this planet. When we design our homes, our cities, our technologies, we need to design them not just for ourselves, but with all life that we are in interconnection with. I keep hearing all these tech bros on their podcast complaining how the future hasn't come because we still don't have these flying cars. Is that what we really want? Do we really want flying cars? Like a fancier version of helicopters for the uber rich? Noise polluting and creating also a whole lot of additional terror risk in our skies? Or maybe we want to open our skies for rewilding, for bringing back the species of birds. And this is not to be technophobic. This is not to say, oh, we should not develop technology of drones or flying cars, because there's a real utility for that. If we cater not to the wanton desires of the few, but the needs of the many. Disaster relief, ambulance services, and so much more. There are uses for these technologies that are actually real uses, not fitting into these wanton desires. So what if the future could actually be everything that we hope for, but not what we've been taught to expect? How that element of surprise can be just what we need to motivate ourselves. How these binaries, how this idea that there's one goodie and one baddie, and if we only eliminate the baddie, now everything is going to be better. Well, things might be a little bit better, or we might create a vacuum that something even more toxic could fill in. Again, no is never enough. Just torching down, if we analyze the history of revolutionary movements, we find that sometimes just destruction leads to an empty space that gets occupied with something even more poisonous. So we have to resist that. And in that, we need to think about peace. Seems like a fantasy, right? Seems like a utopia, seems like something that cannot come to be. But human history is history of equally atrocity and wonder. And every time that peace was made, it was made upon the legacy of atrocity. And yes, there is no peace without justice, but also justice does not just magically appear overnight. Peace is work. Peace is cultivation, peace is stewardship, peace is negotiation. It is tedious and it is laborious. It is not some silly, unsophisticated, privileged fantasy. We are here on earth together, so very temporary. Yet everything that we do today will keep echoing forward. Sometimes just a conversation. Sometimes it's whatever we do in our professional capacity. Sometimes it's being a mentor to somebody that hasn't had the luxury of having mentors, that will birth a whole new reality to being. Future is not just shaped by our actions, but also by our apathy. If we think there's nothing we can do about it, if we give up, if we give in, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, please reach out, let me know, what do you want to do about a more livable future today? Thank you. Do we have time for questions?
We are going to open up for a few questions if anyone has questions after that session. I'm a little bit shell-shocked. Well done, Monika. Thank you. Anyone with questions?
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Odra, and I'm part of the cohort of PASA. First of all, I just want to make a comment. They have made movies, right? that talks about the future and about technology. I don't know whether they were warning us about what was going to happen in the future. So they have made movies talking about the Internet of Things, whereby you can literally control each and every device in your household using your phone. They have made movies talking about the AI. They have made movies talking about the telematics. Now, I just have a question for you. Is technology going to build us, or is it going to destroy us? Because what happens in a situation whereby I have the system of the Internet of Things, right? And they steal my phone, and they hack into the system of the Internet of Things, and they can control every device in my household, including my laptop that has my manuscript as a creative, and they get to steal it. Like, what happens in that situation? Is that building me, or is that destroying me? What happens to the artist, right, who's a rapper that has his music, right, in his PC, and then someone steals his phone or hacks into his phone and gets to control the music or steals that music? What happens to that situation? Or someone who's a photographer, right? They actually hack into his laptop or into his camera and gets to steal all the pictures. Like, is that building us, or is that destroying us? Thank you.
Thank you. I have ADHD, so I have real struggle with multiple questions or super long questions, so it'd be helpful if
one
you
at
make
a
them
time.
short.
Let's do one at a time.
Definitely just one at a time, and as short as possible. So, Internet of Things, I mean, that conversation was happening so much about 10 years ago, kind of in my earlier involvement with the work of Foresight. And I used to always call it Internet of shit we don't need. And when people said, oh, but this is going to be so amazing, this fridge is going to order your eggs, and I'm like, yeah, and it's going to expand attack surface, right? So we have to really consider, whenever these bubbles and hypes of technology get inflated by those that are interested in financially profiteering from them. And unfortunately, a lot of even people in my field in foresight and futurism aren't really doing foresight or futurism, but essentially evangelizing a particular tech that they set to benefit from, sometimes very directly because, you know, they have stake in certain companies. And something that even exists is called criti-hype, that we've witnessed a lot in this AI hype cycle, where, you know, after all of the collapse of crypto and NFTs, when AI just seemed like, okay, that's just another bubble, even if it does have more substance than crypto or NFTs had. But all these sort of inflammatory statements that AI is going to become this god or demon and it's going to be so powerful that it's going to literally render humans obsolete, ultimately makes people think like, well, while I'm still alive, maybe I should still put in some money in OpenAI, right? So we have to really distinguish the hype from reality, and that's why critical perspective is so important. So one of the biggest venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, Mark Andreessen, posted back in October and November Techno-Utopian Manifesto, where he literally cited a whole bunch of fascist authors. In fact, Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, who was the original author of the fascist manifesto written under Mussolini in Italy, you know, as the thinkers that have inspired him, unironically. And he said that tech ethicists and tech critics are the enemies of progress. Now, I can tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, to say that any given trajectory is not inevitable, it's not the only way we could be doing this tech or doing this scientific research, is not being a naysayer, is not being negative. In fact, it's being profoundly positive, because you believe that we, as humanity, can actually do better. And so in that, there's no way to predict one singular future. Even the best people in my field, what we do is analyze the current state of things within, again, science, tech, social, cultural, political realities, limited by our own exposure and biases, And what we can do is predict a sort of possibility space, a kind of perimeter within which certain things are more likely, less likely, or entirely improbable. But with every new development, with every new push, with every new change, things actually change. So there is the answer, whether technology is gonna elevate us or destroy us. The answer is neither of those. But also, technology is not neutral. The best that we can say is analyze any particular technological company, any particular startup, any particular corporation, and any particular project, tool, or platform they develop, and see how that could benefit us or how it could be used to harm and abuse us. And so there's never one simple answer. It's all contextual. But again, if we just accept the inevitability that somebody else offers us, it becomes such. So agency is key. And so many of these dystopian narratives that you spoke about in the movies, my critique earlier in the talk is that they're not cautionary tales anymore. In fact, they become product roadmaps, and we should resist that. Let's give good people good ideas, then bad people ideas to make more money by creating more harm.
Thanks, Monika. We're going to take a question here, and then I think we can take two from Slido. We are running a little bit late. This gentleman was first.
My name is Johnny Muteba. I'm from the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce. Monika, an amazing presentation. The question that I have for you is the role you think the past plays in shaping this future that we're talking about, because there's this obsession by many people wanting to get to the future and basically ignoring the past. For a continent like ours that has been through so many things, so with people telling us to actually forget about the past. Kanye West recently hosted a brunch where he's actually talking about Black Future Month instead of Black History Month. We are told as Africans, forget the past, forget the past. I personally believe that the past has the power. It's actually present. It has the power to shape the future, but also inform the present. It is always present. Is the future a place? Is the future an experience? Are we obsessed with this destination as to when we get there, things will get better? At the same time, we marginalize the past. As an African, I cannot afford to forgo or forget about the past because I believe the future springs from the past. We have to look back to the future. That's my understanding. As you were talking about this future, do you have people who are kind of bringing you back to the past? That's my question. Thank you.
Forgetting the future dooms us to repeat the past. I mean, as I said in the bell hooks quote, we can only hope to break these harmful, extractive, abusive patterns of our past that persist into our present only if we understand them. But also, past doesn't have to be the future. It doesn't have, just because that's how we were in our past, it doesn't mean that we are bound to keep repeating that. If we consciously work to not repeat that. At the same time, what's interesting is that the retellings of the past, especially of the deeper human evolutionary history, man, the hunter, and it was all about competition and only the stronger survives, most of it is a lie that has served colonial, patriarchal, settler narrative. In fact, humans are so fundamentally about collaboration, about cohabitation, about communication. That's the only way that we have survived, because we are by no means the strongest animal. So I think it's really important to know the past, but also look critically at how certain narratives of the past have been served to us. And then we can begin to change. But again, just hurling forward without addressing the inequities in the present day is just bound to create more harm. It's just that shoving things under the rug. And also, what you spoke about this continent, about Global South, about previously colonized world at large, we have this capacity of living in multiple centuries at the same time. And that is not weakness, that is strength. But we need to start believing that and seeing how that is an opportunity.
Thank you. I know there's a whole lot of questions. We need to take a quick break. We're going into our Digital Makers Flex, which is 5 Pechakuchu sessions. But Monika, I want you to answer one of the questions that's from Slido. We've got a session later today called Will AI Eat My Lunch?, which promises to be an incredible debate. So on that, I wonder if you can ask or answer from Nadine, I think, do you believe that AI will eventually take over human jobs? And then we'll wrap. And anyone who wants to speak to Monika, she's going to be here the whole day. Everyone's going to storm you, I apologize. And then we'll take a break. Lungi, to guide the people afterwards. Thanks, Monika.
Yeah, please reach out to me on all social media. And will AI take over human jobs? Well, first of all, AI is not going to do anything. It's those that wield AI. It's those that own these companies. It's those that design those tools. AI is not a thing of its own. It's a tool. And that's a problem, how so much sci-fi made us focus on AI as this artificial consciousness, as this artificial intelligence. Well, we don't actually even know and fully understand and have reached a consensus what intelligence or consciousness in the human, let alone animal realm, even means. So AI is merely a tool. And if we allow that tool to be wielded nefariously by people who see power in that extractive paradigm, yes, of course, it will try and take over humanity. But it will not be AI. It's the people wielding these powerful technological tools. So let's not allow that to happen.